Welcome everybody to the Milford Board of Education monthly regular board meeting. And with that, we'll call the meeting to order with a roll call.
Mrs. Brady?
Here.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Here.
Mr. Miranda?
Here.
Mr. Yaki?
Here.
Mr. Ham?
Here, thank you. Would everybody stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? Thank you. We need a motion to approve tonight's agenda.
So move.
Second. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion, commentary? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Item number 5, we'll need the approval of minutes from our regular board meeting of February 18th of 2021. Motion, please.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Comments? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Item number 6 is the approval of our minutes for the work session of March 12th, 2021. We need a motion.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Item number 7, we'll need the approval of the minutes of our regular board meeting on March 18th of 2021. Motion.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Okay, we're going to move over to item B, which is our presentations for the evening. Superintendent John Spicer.
Thank you, President Ham, members of the board. It is my pleasure to introduce to you this evening Dan Yeager, is our Director of Fine Arts, Extracurriculars, and Activities. Dan Yeager.
Thank you, President Ham, Board of Education. This has been an odd school year. We've gone from almost nothing happening to everything happening, like in the flash of an eye. So it's been really cool. We've got some students we're going to recognize tonight, but just some highlights over the last 2 weeks. Our Winter Guard, which is indoor color guard, recently advanced to the finals of WGI. It's a virtual competition. So we compete in the Scholastic Open category, which is their second highest category. We're probably top 10 in the country. I mean, they've got a legit shot at a top 3 finish this year. So their program is beautiful. So their competition is this weekend. They actually recorded last weekend for that. We've talked about Rocket League before. That's one of our esports teams. Those 3 gentlemen won a national high school title over break. There was a Rocket League team from each state was invited, and our kids brought home a championship. As part of that, I think we're going to get a donation of probably $5,000 to $10,000 worth of computer equipment from the company that hosted that for a esports lab upgrade kind of stuff. So they've been just awesome. I've got some junior high art students here tonight. I know they're not all here. It's a busy time, but we want to recognize them and their artwork. Elena Ditchin, she has a perspective that's behind Mr. Rabe. Her mom is here tonight, but she couldn't be here. So it's a beautiful picture. Grace Hammond did the 3-panel picture by the rear door, and Grace is here now. So Grace, come on up. So Grace is here, and she did the 3-panel. It's a drawing, a watercolor, and of a photo. Yeah. So Grace. So thank you for being here. Annalise Hyatt. Annalise is here tonight. She has the 3-panel mushroom in the rear window. She's back there standing by it right now. So these kids are super talented. So thank you, Annalise. Bria Lee. Bria is not here tonight, but she has the Snickers bar, so it's making me a little hungry. I haven't had dinner yet tonight. I'm on the easel in the back. Van Lewis Rogers. Van is here tonight. It's a portrait on recycled materials. Some of the students may recognize that recycled material because that is a barrier. So thank you, Dan. So some of our art teachers got creative with the barriers and using the acetate for some portraits and some paintings and stuff. So putting those to good use still. Noah Phillips, I did not see Noah. Noah has the bee that's in the window by where Annalise is. And then Sawyer Rokamp, and I didn't see Sawyer tonight either. Sawyer has the sort of the 5-panel circus on the easel. So super talented kids. Can't wait till they get to the high school and see what their skills allow them to do once they get even more into art. So thank you guys for being here tonight. We really appreciate it.
And those will hang here in the board offices for the...
Yeah, those will be in the board office for the until the next meeting. So, if you've noticed, I've also cluttered up the boardroom tonight. Brought some extra stuff today. Felt like you guys didn't have enough tables. So I'm going to introduce Mr. Brandon Ditkin. Brandon is our percussion director at Milford High School. So.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. Thank you for having us this evening. It's really refreshing to get to play in front of a live audience. This is one of our high school percussion ensembles. This is one of several percussion ensembles that will be featured on our Evening of Percussion concert that's coming up on April 29th at 7 p.m. at Milford High School. This is our mallet ensemble. They're going to be premiering a piece hot off the charts from 1904. This features Matthew Bateman, Tanner Helton, Nick Fisher, Gwen Sattler, Braden Ham, and features Logan Woosley on xylophone. This is George Hamilton Green's Chromatic Foxtrot. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3,
So as Mr. Dickens said, they do have a concert on April 29th in the high school auditorium. So we'll be live streaming that as well as parents in attendance. And last but not least, while they're tearing down, Ashley Dalrymple, who is one of our senior class officers, is also here to talk about student council and some other events happening at the high school. Unless, Chris or any of the board members, would you like to say anything to these guys?
No, just well done. That was fantastic.
Yeah,
Lo-
that
Love
was
hearing
That
it.
was awesome.
Every
That really
time,
was.
every time you performed, you just amazed me. That was really great.
Absolutely excellent, and it makes me worry about how unentertaining we're going to be for the rest of the evening. So.
Well, Ashley's got to follow that up, so you guys got some time, so. When they're done, Ashley, you've got the floor.
Okay. Hi, good evening. That's definitely hard to follow up. That was really cool. So I'm here to talk about some things going on at the high school, which, as Mr. Yeager said, things are really picking up and it's kind of starting to feel somewhat normal again. So I'm really grateful for that as it wrapping up my senior year. So one event that we have just completed was Inclusion Week. This promotes the special needs programs at Milford, and it's all about inclusion and how we taught different lessons throughout the week during advisory, and informed a lot of students of things they hadn't previously known. We raised money for Four Paws, which is where Buffy is from. And every 10 years, or once they're 10 years old, they have to retire. So we have started a fund, once again, to fund a new dog. And we sold ducks and T-shirts, and we did a duck raffle where you would chuck a duck, and people won prizes, and it was really fun. And it was cool to get such a turnout for things selling at lunch again, which is something that hasn't happened in a while, so it's good to feel a little normal again. And next, our big event is prom. So that is a lot of the juniors. The juniors have been working really hard to plan that, and it will be on April 24th at the Oasis Conference Center from 8 p.m. to 12 a.m. And we do need chaperones left, so if anyone is available on April 24th, we will be taking chaperones. And I believe that's all I have as the year's getting ready to wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yeager. It's always a pleasure. You can never get too much of that. Thanks so much. All right, moving on, President Ham and members of the board, to a presentation by Mr. Paul Fallon from Fallon and Associates. Mr. Fallon's company did conduct a community survey at the end of February, and this survey was intended to determine the community's perceptions and attitudes about local issues pertaining to our districts. I will now turn it over to Mr. Fallon.
Thank you for having me. Since I'm at least 6 feet away from anyone, does anyone object if I take my mask off so you can hear me a bit more clearly?
I'm sure.
Thank you. My name is Paul Fallon. I'm with Fallon Research and Communications, and I'm going to be presenting the facilities survey results that we conducted recently. I am not going to go through every slide in complete detail, but if you have any questions at the end, feel free to ask them, and I'll be sharing a copy of this with Wendy so that it'll be available for use. Let me jump right in and talk first and foremost about the methods. This was a telephone survey conducted among 300 randomly selected registered voters. For 300 interviews, the overall estimated margin of sampling error is plus or minus 5.65%, or 6% with rounding. Remember that number, it's going to be very important in a few moments. The interviews were conducted during the period of February 22nd through February 26th, so this is very recent data. And the data was stratified so that differences in vital characteristics such as age and gender are all represented in proportion to their percentages of the electorate to prevent under or oversampling from distorting the results. Due to rounding, not all the results went up to 100%, and unless otherwise noted, only statistically significant differences will be presented this evening. Couple pieces of nomenclature. From time to time, I'm going to refer to a group known as staunch supporters, and those are people who supported replacing the building in 2 different tests during the survey and voted for the bond funding issue to do so. In contrast, staunch opposers are people who opposed replacing the building in 2 different tests during the survey and were against the bond funding. Also, parents are people who had children enrolled in the school district at the time the survey was conducted. Non-parents are people who did not have children enrolled in the school district at the time the survey was conducted. And that distinction is important because some of those folks may indeed have been parents because they had children enrolled in other school systems or children who are not yet of school age. Also, I'm going to refer to unaffiliated voters from time to time. Those are people who are neither Democrats nor Republicans. And importantly, highest propensity voters are people who cast votes in at least 2 of the last 3 odd-year municipal November elections, like the one that's coming up later in the year. First and foremost, the opinion environment. One of the first questions we asked on the survey was about the right direction or wrong track of the school district. Not a lot of probative value. There are other reasons that survey researchers start surveys with innocuous questions like this, but let me point out that at the time the survey was taken, 55% of voters said the school district was moving in the right direction, 24% said it had gotten off onto the wrong track, 3% volunteered mixed opinions, and 18% were unsure. Looking at a couple of the subgroup results and the vertical bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen, among staunch supporters, 81% said the school district was moving in the right direction, compared to just 24% for staunch opposers. I also want to point out, too, that among parents, 75% said the school district was moving in the right direction. Now, just to give you some idea about what these numbers mean, ideally, you want the right direction figure to be at or above 60%, and it was pretty close, and it certainly exceeded that with some of the subgroups. We also asked, generally speaking, would you say that property taxes in the area where you live are too high, mostly pretty fair, or too low? As you can see, a plurality, 48% said too high, 46% said pretty fair. None of the respondents said too low, and 6% were unsure. Now, the way that I interpret this data is anytime the extreme response option, which in this case is too high, equals or exceeds the more moderate one in scalar questions like this, I always say to myself, this is an important piece of information. It garners a reflexive response, and it's something that's noteworthy. As you can see from the horizontal bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen, looking at some of the subgroup results, among staunch supporters, 33% said taxes were too high, but among opposers, 65% said taxes were too high, nearly twice as many. So that starts to help paint a bit of a picture about why people might be opposed to the new building. I also want to point out, too, that there were no statistically significant differences when we compared parents with the rest of the sample frame. Among homeowners, 50% said taxes were too high, but it was just 17% among renters. We also asked, overall, how would you rate the quality of education being provided by the Milford Exempted Village School District? As you can see by looking at the vertical bar chart on the left-hand side of the screen, 67% said excellent or good. That's an excellent number. I probably have more public school districts in Ohio than anyone else in my industry. So I have a vast basis of comparison, and you stand well. Looking at staunch supporters, 81% said excellent or good, if you'll look at the horizontal bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen. But what's even more important is that 56% of staunch opposers also said excellent or good. I also want to point out, too, among parents, 76% said excellent or good, and 63% of non-parents said excellent or good. We also asked, how would you rate the work being done by the classroom teachers in the Milford schools? As you can see from looking at the vertical bar chart on the left-hand side of the screen, 60% said excellent or good. Among supporters, staunch supporters, it was 76%. And among staunch opposers, it was 36% because a plurality, 38% were unsure. Starts to help paint a bit of a picture about how much opposers know and don't know about the school system. They think pretty highly of the job you're doing educating kids, but they don't have a lot of awareness about some of the intricate details, like the performance of teachers. And that might help to explain why they're less enthusiastic about the idea of a new building, so keep that in mind. Also want to point out, too, among parents, 81% said excellent or good, but even a statistical majority of non-parents, 51% said excellent or good. It's likely that your teachers can be very persuasive in the discussion about the need for a new building, and their opinions will matter greatly in this community. We also asked, how would you rate the work being done by the Milford School District's Board of Education, or school board as it is known? As you can see from looking at the vertical bar chart on the left-hand side of the screen, 53% said excellent or good. It was 69% among staunch supporters, 32% among staunch opposers. It was also 69% among parents and 45% among non-parents. Those are pretty good numbers for a school board. We also asked about the job that the school district does spending tax money and managing its budget. This is where things changed a little bit. 37% said excellent or good, 27% said fair, 20% said poor or very poor, and 16% were unsure. There's a clear lack of consensus about this issue, and probably a lot of lingering questions. Among staunch supporters, 60% said excellent or good. Among opposers, just 15% said excellent or good, and actually, a plurality bordering on a statistical majority, 45% said poor or very poor. So this is one particular area where staunch opposers might be a little bit disgruntled. As you can see, there were no statistically significant differences when we compared parents and non-parents at 41% and 36% respectively. Now looking at the facilities, we asked in general, do you think that the Milford Junior High School building is a good facility that needs no major improvements? Adequate facility that needs some updating but no rebuilding? Poor facility that needs to be replaced? Or are you not familiar enough with it to have formed an opinion? As you can see overall, by looking at the horizontal bar chart on the left-hand side of the screen, 5% said it's a good facility. 26% said it's an adequate facility that needs some updating, and 39% said it's a poor facility that needs to be replaced. But a sizable number, 28%, said they just weren't familiar enough with it, and another 3% were unsure. Now, I want to call your attention to a couple of the subgroup results. Among staunch supporters, and again, those are people who are favorably inclined to the idea of a new school building and are also willing to vote to pay for it, 60%, a clear statistical majority, said the building's in poor condition. Among opposers, however, they're all over the place. 23% said it's in good condition. Just 4% said it's in poor condition, and another 25% were unfamiliar. Remember, we talked a few moments ago about how the staunch opposers may not be as familiar with all the everyday aspects of the school system. This may be another one. Also want to point out, too, among parents, 65% said it's in poor condition. So they're going to be very responsive to this notion of replacing it. We also asked, do you agree or disagree that even though the Milford Junior High School building may appear serviceable from the outside, it may no longer be suitable to offer modern learning experiences to ensure students are getting the kind of advanced education needed to prepare them for high school and beyond? 48% agreed, under a statistical majority. 22% disagreed outright, and another 30% were unsure. Looking at some of those respondents who agreed, among the highest percentages were staunch supporters, for whom 76% agreed, and parents, for whom 70% agreed. They were on the top tier. On the next tier, still above the 50% threshold, were 18 to 44-year-olds at 55%, unaffiliated voters at 53%, women at 52%, and 45 to 64-year-olds at 51%. And then for all the other subgroups, it drops below the 50% threshold, and there was no clear consensus with them. We also asked, generally speaking, do you support or oppose replacing the Milford Junior High School building with a new one that would serve as a middle school for grades 6, 7, and 8? This was the first of those two tests of support that I mentioned that help us distinguish staunch supporters from staunch opposers. In this test, 57% supported, 30% oppose it, and 13% were unsure. Among the most substantial differences were parents at 79% compared to 47% of non-parents supporting the idea. Also, there was a huge difference between homeowners at 56% and renters at 70%. There's also a big difference by age as well. It was supported by 69% of 18 to 44-year-olds compared to 61% of 45 to 64-year-olds. But then you drop down below the 50% threshold, and actually a plurality, 41% of respondents 65 and older opposed the idea. But in the aggregate, a majority support it in concept. Then we asked, if you learn that because of its age, it will be less expensive to replace the building than continuing to repair it, would you be more or less likely to support replacing the Milford Junior High School building with a new one for grades 6, 7, and 8, or would it make no difference in your opinion? As you can see, 54% said they'd be more likely to support the idea knowing that information, including 81% of staunch supporters, just 7% of staunch opposers were moved by that information. And actually, 72%, a vast statistical majority of that subgroup, said it just made no difference to them. They were unfazed by it. Also, it made 57% of 45 to 64-year-olds support it, but wasn't quite as profoundly impactful for respondents 65 and older, for whom 42% were more likely to support it. Also dropped below the 50% threshold for non-parents at 48%. We also asked, does learning that this plan includes only one building and costs less money than the previous one make you more or less likely to support it, or would it make no difference in your opinion? Now we drop below the 50% threshold. Just 43% were more likely to support it knowing that information. 4% were less likely, and 49% said it just made no difference. So the net effect for this information, when you subtract the less likely of 4% from the more likely of 43%, was 39%. It's not a very important or persuasive piece of information as people are making their decisions about this. On the top tier, 59% of parents said they'd be more likely, 55% of 18 to 44-year-olds said they'd be more likely, and 51% of staunch supporters said they'd be more likely. And staunch supporters are the most ardent supporters here, and even only 51% of them, a bare majority, were moved by the information. Gives you some idea of how feeble it is. We also tested some of the different things that could be accomplished by constructing the new building. For example, how much of a priority is it to provide students with new science and technology learning labs needed to prepare the students with skills for high school and college? 65% said it should be a high priority. It is a high priority. 56% said it's a high priority to ensure that the state receives $10 million in matching funds from the state for constructing the new building before the offer expires. 55% said it's a high priority to have a new middle school building for grades 6, 7, and 8 that is large enough to prevent or reduce overcrowding. 50% said it's a high priority to have a building with cost-saving climate control system, instead of the existing building, which has some rooms with individual air conditioning units and some with nothing at all. Then we dropped below the 50% threshold when we asked about improving the road between the junior high school and high school building to protect students from car traffic. Only 36% of respondents said that's a high priority. Now, why do I put so much emphasis on those saying it's a high priority? Because when you're trained to be an opinion researcher, the two things you pay attention to are cognition and affect. Cognition is merely, do you get the information? Affect is, do you care about it? And that's why we look at this intensity and put so much emphasis on high prioritization. The more strongly people feel about something, the more likely they are to act on it. After reading them all this information, we did a second concept test. And at this point, support increases 12 percentage points to 69%. Goes up with all of the major subgroups in the community, including men at 12%, Democrats at 14%, parents at 15%, even 11% of non-parents, renters 19%, and even senior citizens at 10%. So as they learn more information about the idea, they like it more. Then we move to a bond issue question. Would you vote for or against a 30-year, $65 million bond issue to build a new junior high school building, which would cost property owners about $10 each month in additional taxes for each $100,000 of property value? 45% said they'd vote for it, 38% said they'd vote against it, and 17% are unsure. Were unsure, pardon me. But let's talk about statistics for another moment here. As I said earlier, the estimated margin of sampling error is plus or minus about 6 percentage points. And that means this 45% could be as low as 39%, which is well below the minimum threshold required for passage, but it could be as high as 51%, above the minimum for passage. So you're really on a precipice of sorts, statistically speaking, but that doesn't paint the whole picture here. Among men, 37% said they'd vote for it, compared to 51% of women. Now, it's not unusual to see gender gaps, but this is a big one. Also, among some of the other subgroup differences, 63% of parents said they'd vote for it, compared to 36% of non-parents. 43% of homeowners would vote for it, compared to 62% of renters. 37% of Republicans would vote for it, compared to 56% of Democrats. Among respondents who said taxes were too high, 32% would vote for it, but actually 52%, a majority, would vote against it. They're an attitudinal subgroup. They're not a demographic subgroup like age, race, or gender. Highest propensity. We talked about them at the start. Remember, they're people who voted in at least 2 of the last 3 odd year municipal elections, like the one coming up this November. And they're the people who are disproportionately influential in the outcome of elections when turnout is low, because they turn out in all these municipal elections. Among them, 39% said they'd vote for it, just 39%. Now, I want to talk about something for a moment. This is typically not a piece of information that I share with clients. It's a little bit arcane. It's called a contingency table, or in political parlance, it's what you call a crosstab. But I wanted to show you something. If you read down in columnar fashion, what we're doing is cross-tabulating the bond issue with that second test at the end, that second concept test, because I want to point something out. Among those people who said, yeah, I'd support it, and that was 69% in that second test, only 62% of them, just 2/3, would vote for it, even though they'd support it. They support the idea. But actually, 38% defect and decide to vote against the bond issue, even though they're for the idea. And that's one of the primary reasons you drop below that 50% threshold when you go from that second concept test to the bond issue. We also programmed the computer, by the way, so that respondents who said they were voting against the issue were asked, what is the biggest reason? And I want to read some of the responses to you. Oh, the top most frequently occurring one when we consolidated and aggregated the results were taxes are too high, do not want taxes to increase. And you see those parenthetical references, like 47. It's because we did a word count of the verbatim responses. The word taxes appeared 47 times in the verbatim responses. But let me just read you a couple of the comments from people in your community in their own words when asked why they'd vote against it. Taxes. Taxes just went up $1,000 this year. Another respondent said, my property taxes are too high already. Another respondent said, they don't need it. They've got adequate schools. Another respondent said, I pay too much in taxes now and don't have any children that attend the school. Sometimes the most important information you'll glean from a survey is what is not in it. And I just want to point out to you that nobody said you're doing a terrible job educating children. This is not going to be a referendum on what's happening in the classrooms, which is good news. Now, key findings recap. First and foremost, as I said, the mood was generally a favorable one, although there was some strong sensitivity to property taxes exhibited, which appeared to hinder support for funding the building. Second, the district's teachers, Board of Education, and Quality of Education received favorable assessments, while there were concerns and some uncertainty about spending practices, which also detracted from support. Remember the reaction we got from the staunch opposers. That was probably the area about which they were most disgruntled. With the exception of parents, many in the community were indifferent about the building conditions, which need to be addressed to form a consensus. There was just not a lot of awareness besides those parents about the condition of the building. Next, smaller in comparison, the higher conceptual staunch opposition came from men, senior citizens, Republicans, and highest propensity voters. Conceptual staunch support was higher and stable throughout the survey, with the greatest levels coming from parents, women, 18 to 44-year-olds, renters, and Democrats. Despite this, the prospective bond issue teetered near a majority, with indications that turnout could play a decisive role in the outcome. Remember, we talked about the difference between those highest propensity voters, with 39% saying they'd vote for it, compared to 45% overall. That's 6 percentage points is a big difference. Lastly, simply put, opposition was due to the impact on taxes. Voters liked the idea of having a new building more than paying for it. Now, to close, before I open the floor for any questions, I just want to point something out. Remember earlier we talked about the fact that a majority of staunch opposers said you're doing an excellent or very good job educating children? That's an important piece of information. That says to me that although they may be naysayers about the bond issue, they're not dissidents. They probably consider themselves to be ardent supporters of the school district, just like you do. With that, I'd like to open the floor for any questions. With that, then, I'm going to go ahead and send this information to Wendy, and I will consider myself at your disposal. She has my contact information, and if after reflecting on this information you want to chat a little bit about it, feel free to call me. I will be glad to help in any way that I can to make this information as useful to you as possible.
I will ask one question.
Oh.
Since you do a lot of different school districts, how do you feel this one compares to other districts that you've surveyed in relation to whether they've passed bond issues or not?
I think, as I said earlier, you're teetering on the brink, and you've got some things working in your favor, most certainly, including perceptions of the quality of education. You do have a couple of things working against you. Taxes, which you can't control, that is the perception of taxes, and some uncertainty about spending practices, which is something you can't control. I'm guessing, based on everything I've learned, that this is a very conscientious district, and you probably have a good story to tell. And talking about finances isn't the kind of topic that's terribly animating, so it's hard to hold people's attention, but it's probably a story that needs to be told. Also, I wouldn't hesitate, too, to talk about what's not happening in the school buildings instead of talking about the building itself. As people are starting to think about this more, it's important to explain to them what can be achieved for children by building this new building, the kinds of additional services, the kinds of additional educational opportunities that can be provided. I don't like to talk about buildings. I like to talk about what happens in them, going from sentient subject matter, from inanimate subject matter to sentient subject matter, buildings to kids.
I actually have a couple questions, too. Thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And I appreciate your being willing to talk with us afterwards as we think about this as well. But for right now, I'm guessing you might not be able to answer these, but maybe you can just give us a feel. First of all, is there any way to break out the effects of COVID from this and where people are now versus where we may be later on? Was there any way to gauge if there's economic uncertainty in this?
One of the problems with survey data is it's static. It's like your high school yearbook photo. We all wish that we still look like our high school yearbook photos, but the reality is, much like our visages, which have changed over time, public opinion is equally dynamic. And where people will stand on the matter of COVID and the impact on its life and how that may affect their views about this in November is hard to predict.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
great question. I wish I could answer it.
and that's what I expected, but I thought I'd ask it anyway. And likewise, there is a new tax that'll be hitting fully in one part, a small part of our district, but still, this year. So this data does not yet reflect that, and there's no way yet that we can really tell what that's going to do. So, thank you.
My pleasure. Sir?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions here, or maybe one long drawn-out one, 2 or 3 parts. The one question that you had up there that had a dollar value on it, was that explained as before you get a state portion of the funds? Or was that what we felt would be the net? I think it was 65 million.
That was the number that they would be expected to pay, and taking into consideration all of the factors. And it's an average figure. It's
And-
going to differ for individuals.
And I guess my question is as the bond dollars would go down, I think that's a pretty high output. I'm just one person sitting here on this board, but I would expect that number to be lowered by, 10, 12 million maybe, even with the state money kicking in, which I don't think was calculated at the time because we didn't know what we know now.
My understanding is that when they go to the ballot, they would see that $65 million figure, and the reduction in funding would come afterwards. Now, that there may be different information on that, but they'd still vote on a $65 million issue.
Is that the way it'll be worded?
I think so.
On the ballot language, it would say the millage and the total dollar amount. So
And the
it would
total
say-
dollar amount, and there's OFCC funding is not calculated in there or
No,
back
that-
figured in there in any way.
No.
So it's as though that doesn't exist to an uninformed voter, correct?
Right. So, yeah, the bond language itself that would be on a ballot doesn't talk anything about the state share.
But it's still a good story to tell. 56% said that should be a high priority.
Yeah,
It
and then-
tells me that that will be interesting information and important information for people to know. So I think your intuition's right.
And having sat on that committee and knowing what we know from what we're 99% sure we're going to have offered to us later in the summer, I wonder if that number, if there were some way of saying a net of, I don't know, pick a number, 55 million. I'm wondering how elastic is the support going to be as the bond dollar value goes down? The true
I
bond.
don't know. I don't know. And I'm not sure that you can integrate that information in the ballot language. Ohio's regulations regarding that are pretty strict. So those are questions that unfortunately I can't answer, but they're good ones.
Of course, and this is a difficult subject to teach. We have great educators. I think they might struggle with this a little bit in trying to educate the public, and when the public goes in and you're telling them it's gonna cost 55 million, and they go in and they see 65 million, they're gonna go, yeah, you're lying to us.
Yeah, I would be reluctant to say anything that is in conflict with the ballot language for just that very reason.
Dave, just to clarify, what would be on the ballot language would only be the board's local share. So say the total project was 65 and we were getting 10 million from the state, the bond language would only say 55.
Let me reiterate
sense.
something that, actually, let me state something that I should have mentioned at the outset. This is not a campaign survey. It's a facility survey, and it should not function as a campaign survey, nor should you use it that way.
Well-
This is really just a decision-making tool to understand what people wanted at the time the survey was conducted.
Yeah, but I think, I still believe that asking the question with that figure on, when we know that you're now saying the ballot language would say
55 if we were getting.
55 if we're getting 10 million.
Yeah, the ballot language will only say what the local share is. So if the total project's 65 and 10 million comes from the state, the ballot language would only say 55. It wouldn't say the total project value.
And I'm interested in getting in the DeLorean and going back and saying 55 million and seeing if the response would be different.
But I think that's sort of splitting hairs, because this isn't, I mean, the only thing that matters is the November vote, right? What people's opinions are yesterday or February, it can help inform.
Well, I understand what you're saying, but $10 or $12 million is, I wouldn't call that splitting hairs. That's a huge cut. That's almost, it's
Well,
between
then,
15
but
and 20%.
in theory, that should be better then. So the language, if we were to ask today and we thought the figure was 55, then the question would have read $9 per ton, like whatever, it would have gone down.
Fine. That was a multi-part question that I had in mind, so thank you, appreciate that.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate the work. We're going to move on to our first public commentary. Do we have anybody speaking this evening? No speakers, so we'll move on to our treasurer's report. Treasurer Brian Rabe.
Thank you, Mr. President. First item is recommend the approval of the board reports for the month ending March 31st, 2021.
So-
Okay, yeah, motion to approve the board reports for month ending March 31st, 2021 as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion.
I just wanted a couple items to point out. If Claremont County went through a full reappraisal back in 2020, those figures are sent up to the state, and then the state approves them, sends them down to the county auditor, and then the tax bills come out. There was a delay in the state getting that funding back, or the report, the approval, back down to the county, so therefore it delayed tax bills coming out, which is delaying the receipts coming in from what we've seen in the past. So if you look at the reports in March, the last couple of years, we've actually received the final settlement from the county in March. This year, we didn't receive that until April, so those numbers do look a little skewed. But next month's reports, those will all be reflected, and they should be in real time. Not only does it reflect the real estate values, it also affects the rollback in the homestead that we receive from the state, but also it affects the money that we receive from Union Township, Miami Township, from the TIF, because they have to wait to those final settlements before they can issue the TIF. So a lot of that we received in March last year. Obviously, we haven't received it in March. We probably won't receive it until sometime in April, or Miami Township maybe in May. So I just wanted to point that out. That's the reason why the revenue side looks a little odd versus years in the past. So that's all I had.
Comments, questions?
No.
Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Next item for approval is the appropriations resolution.
We'll need a motion to approve adjusting the appropriations due to the state and federal monies being received, as well as monies being received for student scholarships.
So moved. Second.
We have a motion and a second.
We did receive some additional money for student scholarships, therefore we needed to up the appropriation so that those scholarships could be issued. Also, the auxiliary services that we received from the state for St. Mark's and St. Elizabeth and Seton. This is the second year of their biennial, so they have to spend all their money out by the end of the fiscal year. We did receive their final payment from the state in February, therefore we need to appropriate all that money so that they can spend it and don't have to send anything back. The other two adjustments were grant adjustments from the state.
Questions? Roll call, please.
Mr. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Next, asking for approval for 2 quitclaim deeds for the property at South.
We need a motion to approve the 2 attached quitclaim deeds. The developer needs to split the property at south in order to get the loan necessary for development.
So moved.
Second.
Motion and a second. Discussion?
Yeah, so the property down at South, the developer can't get a loan on the total property because of the building itself, the asbestos. So what they are asking us to do is split the property into 2 parcels so that they can get a loan on the parcel that doesn't have the building on it. And then the parcel that has the building on it, they would just pay us through their funds, cash funds. So basically, they're just asking for the board's approval to split that property.
Yeah, and this has no impact to the net monies due to the
No,
school.
none at all. And if you notice the quitclaim deed, it's a quitclaim deed, and it goes right back to the district. So we still own it, but obviously the development and stuff, that's still in process for final close and stuff. But that's still there. But this is a hurdle they needed to jump through.
I hadn't thought of this before, but I'm going to ask a quick question. So now we've got basically 2 deeds for that property down there. Are they linked together such that you can't sell one without the other?
You mean as far as how it's cut out? Is that what you mean?
Yes, I mean,
You're worried about the backing out on the deal on one piece and keeping the other piece. Is that what you're saying?
just tying them together so that when they're sold together.
The way they parceled it off, technically they could, but I think where the road's going in would actually impede on the building parcel.
They wouldn't have an easement to the building, correct?
Yeah. But no, there's still a contract for them to buy the total property.
Okay.
And our expectation is we'll close on this property soon.
The anticipation right now is within the first 2 weeks of May. And yes, both parcels will be sold at the same time. Like the contract that we have with them if they tried to only buy one of the 2.
Boy, it'll be nice to have this done.
Yes, it would.
What's it gonna be developed to? Houses?
There's some single-family homes, there's patio homes, and also the building itself, they're going to put 6 townhomes, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that's exactly right, but they are going to develop the building and sell, I think it's 6 townhomes.
Interesting. Thanks.
Those plans, if anybody's curious, is on the City of Milford website.
Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you, Treasurer Rabe.
Thank you.
Moving on to superintendent business, Superintendent John Spicer.
Thank you, President Ham, members of the board. It is my pleasure this evening to present to you a facilities presentation. You'll hear from other members of the team, central office team this evening as well. Roy, next slide. Oh, go back one. So this evening, I am here to discuss with you the proposed facilities project of a Milford Middle School that would entail grades 6, 7, and 8. That would also include some site circulation and safety. Actually, go one more, Roy. I'd also like to, along the way, talk about some of the history of our building projects over the last 20 years or so. We do have a 4-pack of elementaries: McCormick, Meadowview, Mulberry, and Pattison. It is hard to believe that these buildings, the bond was passed in May of 2001, almost 20 years ago. So it's just incredible to think that it's been that long. The facilities are wonderful. It was a 4.1 mil bond, approximately $41.5 million. Mulberry, McCormick, those facilities opened in August of 2003. Meadowview and Pattison opened in August of 2004. I think it's important for the community and for the board to know that those bonds for those 4-packs do expire in December of 2030. The next would be the Milford High School partial renovation and addition. That was passed in November of 2007. It was a 2.05 mil bond generating $31.3 million. And that was for the addition of the 9th grade community, the cafe, the main offices, the main entrance, the music and band wing. There was also enough dollars to add 4 classrooms to the current Milford Junior High School and the air conditioning units. That opened in 2010 and 2011. It's important to know as well that those bonds will expire December of 36. We also have a 2-pack of elementaries, Boyd E. Smith and Charles L. Seipelt Elementary. Those opened in August of 2016, which is really hard to believe. No bonds were issued for those 2 buildings. I think that's very important for our community to know. Those were earned credits from the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission, and those were also locally funded at about $2 million from the general fund. Okay, very good. Next slide, please. I thought it would also be important for us to take a look at the facilities across the street on our high school and junior high campus, and note that there are projects over there that have been paid for by private donations from our boosters. The tennis courts, baseball and softball dugouts, ticket booths, baseball, softball, tennis restrooms, the soccer stadium fencing and the ticket booth, and the stadium artificial playing surface, totaling about $1.1 million, which is an amazing feat by any private group to raise those funds and to donate to our district. So we're very appreciative of that. Also note that the facility we're in this evening, the Robert Farrell District Administrative Office is here. We did open this facility in August of 2018. That was funded via the Permanent Improvement Fund. Next slide, please. Thank you. The history of the junior high school building, I think is very important to know and to understand. And I think it's complicated too. In 1962, it did open up, the current Milford Junior High School facility did open up as the Milford High School. Enrollment in 1962 for grades 9 through 12 were 618 students in that building. Currently, in that same building, there are 1,008 students, and it's been as high as 1050, I believe, was the highest it's been in recent years. In 1989, Milford High School and Milford Junior High School did swap spaces, so that's important to note. And then in 2010, the modulars that were used during the 9th grade community renovations were moved to Milford Junior High School. They are still there, and we still use them. So that, in conjunction with, can we go back one slide, Roy? Actually, one more, please. The Milford Junior High School 4-classroom addition that happened in 2007, that opened in 2010 and 11, in combination with those modulars. We can go back to the current slide. Thank you, Roy. Oh, back one more. Thank you. They did give us an addition of 8 extra classrooms there. What I would like for you to know is that even with the addition of those 8 classrooms, we are at capacity with teachers in every nook and cranny possible in that building. Next slide. Next, I'd like to turn over to Mr. Jeff Johnson to discuss the OFCC overview and process.
Thank you, Mr. Spicer. So in 2000, when we started working with OFCC, the co-funding percentages were established at that time with the agreement that the district entered into with the state, which is for all co-funded amounts, there's 73% local funding and then the state funds 27% of that funding. That was based on valuation per pupil. So again, based on the rankings in 2000, out of all 611 districts in the state of Ohio, our funding percentage ended up at 27%. That's been the same then, and it's the same all the way through. We can't change that. So the 4-pack and the high school renovation in addition at the junior high was built under what they call the ELP, or Expedited Local Partnership Program. So when they first started, OFCC first started funding school construction in Ohio, this program didn't exist. And there were a lot of districts like Milford who needed to build buildings, but our number hadn't come up yet. So funding wasn't available for Milford. So how do we manage that? So what the state did, they created the ELP program, which basically meant that when we built the 4 elementary schools, the high school addition and renovation, and the junior high 4 classrooms, we actually paid 100% of those costs, but we earned credits. We earned that 27%. State wasn't writing a check, but they were still essentially promising that 27%. So then when our number came up, quote unquote, and they offered us the money, we entered into the Classroom Facilities Assistance Program, CFAP, which that's when the state starts writing a check. At the time, what we ended up doing with that money is we were able to build Boyd and Seipelt primarily based on the credits that we earned in building the 4-pack, the high school edition, the junior high edition. We did contribute about $2 million to that in order to get the buildings that we needed. But the state, Brian, correct me if I'm wrong, was around $22 million the state provided for that, and I think we kicked in about $2 million. So that was, we entered into CFAP at that point in time. We took those credits that we earned and we built Boyd and Seipelt.
Before we go to the next slide, have we generated any questions for you today at this point?
I guess the only question that I have is, I've been looking at that 27% for many, many years. Does that ever get reevaluated?
It does not.
Okay. Very clear.
There we go, no, next.
Well, and for clarification, the number is based upon our ranking, which is basically sort of a wealth number.
Yes, that's
and
correct.
So you may have a district, other districts that receive much higher amounts when they go to pass their bonds. I think Batavia, last time they went out, 80% of it came from the state, 20% of it was local. I think on the other side of that, some of the school districts to the west of us really don't receive much funding at all. I think Forest Hills might be 9% from what I remember. So it varies by district. 27 happens to be our number.
27% is our number. It is, please don't ask me to explain or justify the formula that the state comes up to justify those numbers, but a high level, yes, it is based on the wealth of the district. And I know there are districts around us that their number is so low that they don't even take the state money because it's not worth it.
The extra effort of working with the state and playing by their rules.
I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I think you're probably pretty close.
Yeah, I think that's implied.
Okay. Next slide, please. So as we move forward through the slides, please feel free to stop us, ask us questions, et cetera. I would like for us to review the 2019 bond campaign. In May of 2019, there was a bond issue placed on the ballot. The picture that you see there is sort of a graphic of what the ask was. It was a 4.7 mil bond generating about $97 million. We were asking for a 6-8 middle school at the time. Also renovations to the Milford High School. That would be the center part, where it was formerly the junior high.
It's basically the 10-12 section of the building, so the 10-12 classrooms for the most part.
Thank you, sir. Also a fine arts auditorium. There were some athletics improvements in field turf, et cetera, and also the campus site and safety circulation. We did learn at that time that the community, about 57% said no, they were not interested at the time, voted no. So from that, what we did as a district is develop the Community Advisory Team, CAT. The purpose of the CAT was to gather input from our community, see what ideas, feelings, thoughts, their intentions about what they would like to see in the future. And what we gathered from the CAT Community Advisory Team was that they were in favor of a 6-8 middle school. They were in favor of the site circulation and the safety portion. But we did not come to a consensus about an auditorium at the time. So that leads us to today, 2021, the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission. We have been in constant contact with Joe McNeil from OFCC, and as recently as this week, a few times. And so there is a potential offer on the table. They will fund up to 1,141 students in grades 7 and 8 at about $275 per square foot, totaling about $44 million. The local share of that 1,141 students is $32 million. The state share at 27% will be about $12 million. We would have the guidance from the OFCC in leading us through that project. What is important for you to know is that we're expecting probably tomorrow or Monday a notice of conditional approval that we will ask you as a board to accept, to vote on the notice of conditional approval to accept and be a part of the OFCC project. And then in July 27th specifically, the OFCC does meet. They cannot guarantee us at this time that we will be approved, but as much have said that. So we are next on the list to be approved. So hopefully on July 22nd, we'll get that approval. 2 weeks after that approval, the State Board of Control meets and they approve it as well. What will then have to happen is if the board is going to place the bond issue on the ballot, there is a deadline of August the 4th, 2021. So we will need, in order to file for November 2nd, so we would have to meet as a board and have a special meeting. We do not have a board meeting prior to that, so we would need to meet probably August 2nd, maybe 3rd at the latest, but probably the 2nd to give time to get that information to the county. If I generated any questions?
This might not be the right place for this, but how concerned are we about construction costs? That I know in the past it's been 5% year over year, and it's exploding this past year. So
Yes.
would that mean we would get less? Would OFCC
Bang for your
adjust-
buck, I think, is what you're
Yeah,
asking.
bang for the
So
buck.
Jeff,
Like, is
Jeff
it-
can answer that question about how
So-
construction is right now, but
So
yes.
I've reached out to some people in the industry and kind of asked them what they're seeing, recently with COVID effects and things along those lines. Material costs are kind of crazy right now. I don't know if anybody's going to try to buy a 2x4 at Home Depot or Lowe's, but it's kind of crazy. And that's across the board with, metal and all sorts of building materials. The material costs are kind of crazy. But at the same time, because of COVID and a lot of shrinkage within the construction industry, a lot of that overall inflation has kind of shrunk a little bit. How long is that going to last? How impactful is that going to be? Just like everything else that's been COVID-related, it's really hard to judge. But from what the feedback I've gotten, just from reaching out to people I know, between the increase in the square footage allotment that OFCC has done over the even last year and this year, I think they're approving it like this month, next month, I forget exactly what Joe told us. They update their cost sets every year, and the increase in their cost sets have been more over the last 2 years than they have been historically. So the combination of those two, that $275 a square foot, I personally believe that it's still a conservative number, but I feel a lot better about that number than I did of what OFCC's number was 2, 3, or more years ago.
Okay.
I hope that answers your question.
It does.
I can't promise anything, but that's kind of my feeling.
Well, yeah, and I think that, I mean, the way this process works, we know the dollars that are going to be coming in. We'll have that number before the design process even starts. So we've got to build to the number that we have without, hopefully without having to dip into any other monies for that. So you sort of make the changes as you determine the cost of the
And I'll
project.
get to that in a couple of slides and kind of describe a little bit how that process works.
One of the things, Superintendent Spicer, that I think on the previous slide, if I can drive here, you're talking about a 1,141 students, and that is for 2 grades,
Yes,
as
sir.
we know. However, we are looking to do 3 grades, and
Yes.
I'm
So
going to
the,
answer my own question, I guess, but the difference between the number that was put up on the screen earlier and now.
Give me just a
is
second.
related in
Yes.
a large
Yeah.
portion to.
Next slide.
we're going to
Is
get
that the
there.
next slide? I'm sorry.
We're going to get there. The 1,141 students also equates to 154,000 square feet.
Correct.
Correct.
We'll get to the other square footage in just a second, and the additional cost. Jeff's going to do that on the next slide. But I also feel that, Emily, that's a great question. I'd also like to kind of just give a plug for trades. We have a lot of students that would benefit from going into some trades. We know that masons are incredibly hard to find. Electricians are incredibly hard to find. If you yourself try to get someone to come and do some plumbing or electrical work, et cetera, they're just not there. And it's a great career and a great opportunity for our young people. So that's a shameless plug for that. And then this slide, I'm going to turn over to Jeff to talk about the additional square footage.
So as Mr. Miranda was just alluding to, we've talked through with the CAT and with the community of building a 6-8 middle school, not just a 7-8. So the funding coming from OFCC is primarily 7th and 8th grade, which is why those numbers are 1,141 students. I think most of us realize that we average around 500 a class. Obviously, some of them are more, including this year's senior class. I think it's 522.
Yes, sir.
Some of them are a little bit less, and we've had bubbles that have gone through, but 500-ish is kind of where we've been. So you multiply that by 3, you're at least 1,500 students. So 1,500 students, you're looking in the low to middle 190,000 square feet. Realistically, making sure that we build for the future and don't end up in a situation where, I think we all realize that at Boyd and Seipelt, we probably underbuilt those buildings based on OFCC enrollment projections. We are looking at next year potentially one of our grade levels at Boyd E. Smith being in the library because we don't have enough space for the students that are in there. So we are looking at building a building. We're still trying to do some calculations, so it's not as simple to say X number of students equals X number of square feet. Those calculations also include, well, how many classrooms is that? How many labs is that? How many special ed classrooms is that? How many offices is that? That's what builds out to that total square footage. So we're still kind of working through what that looks like. But as you can see up there, we're looking at somewhere between 200 and 225,000 square feet that we believe is what's needed to serve the students we have even today, let alone moving forward for the next 50 years. So the square footage above the 154,000 square feet that Mr. Spicer just mentioned, whether it's 200, 225, or somewhere in between, becomes what's called a locally funded initiative, or as everybody likes acronyms, an LFI. What that means is that the state does not co-fund that. We are responsible for 100% of that cost.
And that, it's the sixth graders because the state already said we paid for sixth graders in the 4-pack.
Exactly.
And
That's where I was headed before.
And it's we think we need more than what OFCC is projecting our funding, so
We do, and a lot of that's with the preschoolers, and I know my colleagues are going to talk a little bit about the benefits of 6-8 middle school and why we need to put the sixth graders in there. It helps with redistricting. It helps with a lot of other things that they're going to touch on here in a little bit.
Jeff, I'd like to reiterate something you said. Chris, when you said we'll have a certain amount of money and we have to build to it, that's fine, but we don't want to get into another situation where we ended up with Sipelt and Boyd. And there were a lot of factors there. There was nothing else really that we could have done at the time. But as we're looking at this, and I know you do a great job at figuring out projected costs, et cetera, but, we've got to be very, very careful when we price this out to make sure that we're getting what we need, because we don't want to end up in the project a year, 2 years down the road and need another $10 million to get what we really need. So there are certain things where you can't just build to the money that we have, because it wouldn't be the appropriate decision, so.
No, I agree, and you make a great point, and again, from talking to other people, what does particularly the school construction industry look like right now? What's OFCC doing? I feel a lot better about OFCC square foot numbers, and combined with what I'm being told about inflation and within the construction industry specifically. The square foot number, again, I still believe it's a conservative number, and that's not a bad thing. It is what it is. I think the thing that we really have to zero in on is, Boyd and Sipelt are really nice buildings. They're just a little too small. So, we built those buildings basically to OFCC square foot numbers. We had to put in, $2 million to get the right building for us. But that wasn't additional square footage. We built to the square footage that OFCC funded on both of those buildings. The $2 million that we put into that was making sure that we got the right quality building that we wanted. So that's relatively close. I think what we need to continue to work on over the next month or couple of months is, what's the right square footage for us so that we don't end up building buildings, a building that's not big enough for us.
Could you clarify something for me? When you say that the OFCC number is conservative, you're talking the low side?
Yes.
The high side? Okay.
Yes.
So it may get to a point where we look at it and say, oh, this is not quite what we need a better quality, we need something a little different than what OFCC would prescribe.
It's not, again, I feel better about it than I did, but yes, conservative from a lower or cheaper side.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think we've always talked about flexible space. When we build, we want to build a flexible space, so because we don't know what education looks like 5, 10, 20, 30 years from now. I think when we go through the design phase and we focus on that, that's going to give us a little more flexibility in terms of increasing enrollment from time to time, rather than traditional buildings we built in the past with traditional classrooms. And I think that will help us. I think at the end of the day, when we get into the design phase, it's not going to be a matter of finding additional money to fund the project. It'll be a matter of prioritizing what do we want and then taking away what we can't afford in order to get to that number. So,
Yeah, and that's some of what we did with Seipelt and Boyd too. And I think that we're sorry about some of it. So, I'm sorry, I should say.
The next two slides, Jeff Johnson's going to cover some of the OFCC timelines, design and construction, et cetera.
So we talked a little bit about, this is a generic design timeline from OFCC, and I'm going to, the next slide will kind of be a little more specific to Milford and to what we're proposing. But you go through design, and it's a 12 to 18 month process to go through designing a building like this. So there's 3 steps to that. You know, the first step is what's called schematic design. And at the end of schematic design, there's an estimate that's done. So what you want to make sure of is that the building you're designing is within your budget. And needless to say, it's at the end of SDs, that design's kind of, I don't want to say generic, but high level. So the estimate is better than a square foot estimate, which is kind of what we're looking at, but it's still fairly high level. You make sure that you're within your budget, and then you move into design development, which is exactly what it sounds like. You start developing out that design, you start putting more and more details into it, and then again, you stop and you do an estimate. And you make sure that you're within your estimate. And if you're not within your estimate, as Andrea just said, we start, all right, what do we have to pull out of that? And then you get into construction documents, and that's where you really start putting the details into the construction documents, the drawings that contractors will look at and will actually give you a bid. I'll build this building for you for X amount of dollars. And again, you do an estimate. And then you get into the bid process and/or GMP, which is guaranteed maximum price. Some of that depends on what type of delivery method that we choose to go forward with. And then once that's done, you write the contracts with the contractors, and you start building your building. And you know, it's 12 to 24 months. In a building like we're looking at, we're certainly looking more at the 24 months rather than a 12-month kind of cycle. So if you, Roy, you want to jump to the next one. So kind of what this looks like, and I tried to shrink this so everything's not exactly equal as far as it looks like. But, you know, if you look at November of 21 for a bond approval, AE, it's your architect and engineer. There's a selection process that goes through to select who your architect and engineer are going to be. That is a joint process with OFCC. They are a co-owner through this process, so they get a say in who that is as well. We get proposals in from various architects. There's a rubric that we rank them, we interview them, and at the end of the day, we end up obviously selecting one of them. And that takes about 4 months. And it might take 3, it might take 5, but about 4 months. And then obviously you start the design process, and you can kind of see about 4 months to do each one of those processes and about a month in between to do that estimate. During that design process, we will meet with all the stakeholders. We'll get input from teachers. We'll get input from administrators. We'll get input from students. We can, all those kind of things. They'll come in and people can kind of give their wish list. This is what I'd like to see, science teachers, phys ed teachers. We'll meet with different groups and we'll get their input so that they've got good, valid input into what the design is. Now, obviously, everybody doesn't get what they want because you're not going to get that for $275 a square foot. But then we kind of work through the priorities and making sure what we really need. We give that feedback and we continue to work through that process. We go through Once we get done with that, again, we go through the bidding and the GMP process, and then about a 2-year construction process, which the way we lay out, we passed this bond issue in November. We're looking at moving into this building in August of 2025. At the end of that, our plan is that our students will stay in the current junior high during construction. We'll move them in similar to what we did with both Boyd and Seipelt. They stay in their buildings. We'll build the new buildings. We move them in over the summer, and then once that's done, we'll do the demolition to the existing building and obviously clean up the rest of the site. So that's kind of the timeline of what we're looking at with this project.
Have we generated any more questions at this point? Okay. Brian Rabe.
So OFCC's board is scheduled to meet on July 22nd. At that board meeting, what they will do is they will vote to approve the project, which basically will set aside the money at the state level for our project. Once they do that, the district then has 13 months in order to pass a bond issue to raise the local funds needed for the project. So in that 13-month period from July, there are 2 elections. One will occur in November, and a second one will occur in May. If the board chose not to run or would fail both levies, then the district would fall into what's called a lapsed district. And as a lapsed district, what the state says is you have to pass your bond issue first, and then we'll try to figure out where can we get the money from to afford your project. So at times, there are some districts who pass their bond issue, and it still may take another year or 2 years for the state to catch up to get them their money. So that's where you would fall into a lapsed district if you didn't pass. Final thing just to point out, I know Mr. Fallon talked about the funding for the school district. We just kind of want to point out that over the last 5 years, the district has been awarded the Ohio Auditor State Award for financial reporting and applying for all applicable laws. We just wanted to point that out, that we believe we do have verification from the state with that. Next slide.
Is the money set, so July 22nd, they say you get $10 million, like we're putting $10 million. What if because they've already estimated based on our 7th and 8th grade population.
Yes.
So they already
Yes.
know that number.
Yeah.
Yes. That will be in the notice of conditional
Okay.
approval. We'll get that number in the next, hopefully tomorrow. I was expecting it today, but hopefully tomorrow, but if not tomorrow, Monday.
And then to confirm under a lapsed district, we would have to pass the bond first. We would not be able to guarantee that those monies would be available.
No. Typically, what the state does is they'll go down the list of who's up in ranking, and they'll go, are you interested, are you interested? And then if they still have money left over, then they go to the lapsed districts and say, are you interested and are you interested? So it is a process, but you're still kind of waiting on the state. Even though you have to raise your money first, you're still kind of waiting on the state to say, okay, now we have money that we can fund you for your project.
So typically for a district that does that, they'll have to set aside general fund money with the expectation that that will be replaced, but ultimately the project is the project. So let's say this project's $60 million.
Right.
We expect 10 from the state. We go to the voters for 50, or we go to the voters for 60,
At that time, your lapse, you would still go for the 50.
which means we would have to earmark some money somewhere if that money didn't come in.
If it didn't come in
Or
from the
wait,
state.
or start
Yes.
collecting money but not break ground or start the process.
Yeah,
Right.
that's probably not a great idea.
Yeah,
Harry.
yeah, you're definitely more reliant on the state when you fall into a lapse district in their time frame. The next slide, we just wanted to give out, so we did take a look at what the cost and what the millage would be on various levels of bond issue. So what we took a look at is using a 4% interest rate. If you'll notice across the top, we looked at various amounts, anywhere from 50 million up to 55 million. And then if you look at the far left-hand side, we looked at the various years of the bond issue. So the max the bond issue can go out would be 37 years. So we looked at anything from 30 years down to 37 years. And what we did is we did a calculation and looked at, okay, at 50 million, what would the millage be and what would be the cost to a $100,000 valued house? That would be appraised value, that would not be assessed value. So you can kind of get an idea of where the millage would fall. I don't believe at any time the millage ever went above 3%. Everywhere it is below the 3% mills. But that's just to give you an idea of what the millage would be as well as what the cost to a homeowner would be.
And Brian, we would still be above the 4% debt threshold?
Yeah,
So we
there-
would require the special waiver from the state in order to be between 4% and 9%, I think it is?
Right, we would still have to go through, pass those resolutions, knowing that in the past, the last issue of the 97 million, we were well within the debt limit that we could do. So falling, obviously, at 55 million, we would definitely fall within that where we would get state approval from that.
It should be
But
well,
it would be
well
some-
under 9%. We're above 4% now, right?
Correct.
So, but it'd be well under 9%.
I'd have to run the numbers, but yeah, but we would still have to pass those resolutions to get approval from the state.
All right, the next few slides will be Jenny Berkeley, Paul Daniels, Jill Hollinsworth Smith, and Rob Dunn.
All right, well, thank you. In these slides, we'll talk and focus primarily on why a 6-8 middle school, as Jeff had mentioned. So the first slide is really about facility and program capacity. And first and foremost, it's important that all of our students have an optimal learning space every day. So in looking at the first bullet, we talk primarily about focusing on the redistribution of preschool students into our elementary buildings. So the current building where preschool students are housed is what was the old Miami Elementary building, and now on Route 32, and houses both the preschool and extended day program, as well as the Success Academy. So we're looking forward to growing and expanding the continuity of services for our pre-K-12 group of students as a school family. Preschool students would be able to begin within an elementary school setting and be a part of the PK2 grade level band where early literacy is so critical. This would also create one less transition for our littlest Eagles and be able to adjust more seamlessly as they would begin in that elementary setting. This is also an opportunity for our K2 teachers to be able to collaborate more, or I should say our PK2 teachers to be able to collaborate more and access more opportunity and just resources among each other. So we're excited about that. As you know, our preschool is an integrated preschool setting. We are required by the state to be able to serve our students with disabilities, our special needs students within a 50-50 model where both students with disabilities and typical students are learning together. So some of those students really have some of our most significant and challenging needs. So just the plethora of services that could be provided in the elementary settings would really be advantageous for all of both the students and the staff. I just want to note that the extended day before and after school program that exists in our elementary students would still be able to exist in those buildings. So that's a great service to our families here, and we would continue that. Success Academy relocation will be a part of our planning process. So at this point, we just want to note that Success Academy is a great opportunity for some of our high school students and will exist, but the relocation would just be part of that planning. And then the last bullet, as Jeff had talked a little bit about, and I wanted to talk about, is one of the priorities of this community has always been to have neighborhood schools. That's been for years, that when past levies had come up, that parents really made that a priority. So in order to keep neighborhood schools, we would have the space, or our buildings that will become PK5 would have the space for all of our students as the 6th grade students moved up. So there would not be a redistricting need if we were able to create this 6-8 building. And as Jeff had shared, both Boyd E. Smith and Seipelt are actually really at capacity at this time. In fact, this upcoming year, as he had shared, there's a building, first grade classroom in both Seipelt and at Boyd that we've had to move into what really is just an extended learning space that caps at 16 students. So one of our classrooms is going to remain at 16, and then the other 2 or 3 in that first grade level will actually be a little bit higher because we have to use that space, but we can't cap at more than 16 students. So we're already in that situation. And then, as Jeff had also said, we're also, if we get really a few more kindergartners at Boyd, and that would be their home neighborhood school, we are going to have to access what's really an extended learning area that's a part of the library. So Wyatt has space, but that takes away space in the library and really probably isn't an optimal space for learning just because it was created as an extended learning space. So those are really the key parts of this slide that discuss facility and program capacity. So questions I can answer for this slide?
Yeah, one question, Jenny.
Sure. I know. I felt like it came from over there for a minute. I was like, oh.
It happened earlier, too, so that's really weird.
Okay.
So you're saying that the preschool students would go to their home elementary?
So I think that's still part of the planning process. We've talked before that definitely 2 buildings, if not 3 buildings, could house preschool classrooms based on their current space. We haven't determined what those buildings would be, but likely McCormick would have space as well as Pattison, and if we wanted to look at more of a central location, we would probably look at Mulberry. It more than likely needs to be one of the 4-packs, as we know that Seipelt and Boyd are just smaller overall. So in thinking about that, if you look at Pattison and maybe McCormick, you kind of had the northern end, southern end, and then that middle area would potentially be Mulberry.
Okay, so some of the kids wouldn't have
They
to
would still be in an elementary setting, but likely have to transition up, yes, to potentially a homeschool.
Okay.
Anything else? All right. Passing the mic.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to share what benefits having a 6-8 building would bring us in the area of teaching and learning. In the state of Ohio, learning standards for each subject area define what all students should know and be able to do. So like Jenny mentioned, learning standards are organized by grade bands. We have a PK to 2 grade band in terms of our standards in our state, a 3rd through 5th grade band, 6th through 8th grade band, and a 9th through 12th grade band. The grade bands represent developmentally appropriate standards for those ages. The learning starts at the beginning of the grade band, so it would start at grade 6, for example. Then it builds across the 3 grades and culminates with the end of that grade band with the learning that they're supposed to have attained. So I'm going to give you some examples in math, which is not my dominant subject, but for example, in kindergarten through 5th grade, the standards for those grades in one area of math are numbers and operations in base 10. When the students get to 6th grade, they start a new grade band, and those standards transition to ratios and proportional relationships, different topics. Another example, in kindergarten through 5th grade, the standards in math around measurements and data are what are concentrated on. When the students enter 6th grade, those standards change to statistics and probability. So because of that, there are some real benefits, powerful benefits, to having students within grade bands in the same building. So in a 6th through 8th grade building, for example, the programs and the resources that we use to teach those standards for 6th through 8th grades are different than what we use for pre-K to 5. Having 6th and 8th grade together, 6th through 8th grade together, using the same programs and working toward the same standards would allow us to differentiate for all children. It would increase our opportunities to group children for intervention, for enrichment, for review of standards that they need. It would allow for sharing of materials, like Jenny mentioned, across those 3 grade levels. And it would provide for much more targeted professional development for teachers specific to the learning and the content for 6th through 8th grade students. Also importantly, a 6th through 8th grade building would provide equity with our programs. True equity means that differences in educational opportunities and outcomes are not the result of differences in wealth, income, power, or possessions. So we should try to make sure that nothing holds a child back from the opportunities we can provide for them to pursue their talents and their passions. Currently, a 6th grader wanting to take band or choir, for example, has to come to school early to take those courses before school starts. It's a much greater challenge for some families in our district than for other families. So consequently, the result is that some students are not able to access band and choir. In one building with a 6th through 8th grade schedule, students could have those courses during the day because the staff is available, and any student who wants to pursue those could do so. Students would also benefit from opportunities for clubs and explorations that would be designed for their age group that are just not possible when we're splitting them across 6 buildings now. Another example is the math cohort that we currently run for our 6th grade students. Some students in 6th grade take their 6th grade curriculum in math, as well as a compacted 7th and 8th grade curriculum that allows them the opportunity to take Algebra 1 when they start 7th grade. This cohort is spread across all 6 elementaries. If they were in one building, so much more powerful because those students could work together as one large cohort with differentiation and a lot more support from each other as a large group as well as their teachers.
Thank you. Really wanted to focus under academics about the flexible course offerings. As we brought to you over the last few years in the secondary realm, we've probably approved somewhere between 9 to 11 new courses at the high school. Mr. Fallon used some really great language about the importance of STEM in his presentation, and also about we don't have the availability in that building to add. So there's a lot that we're not doing at the junior high. In that same time period, we've only added 2 new courses. We've converted the old home economics room into another classroom space, and the cafeteria, quite frankly, can't even fit. We're running 4 lunches this year, and we'll potentially use half of the gymnasium next year to continue to be able to do that. But we are really limited, and there's a lot that we're not able to do at the junior high simply because we don't have the space, or we don't have the ability to convert, say, the art room into a STEM lab or to be used for another purpose throughout the day. So really, we believe that that's really important. And, we think about our robotics, limitations on the size of the choir and the band, potentially having to move one of those to the stage again. There are some real challenges, and that really gets to the equity and the ability to offer a diverse course offering. Mr. Spicer was right on time tonight when he talked about the importance of trades. We do need additional time with our students around career exploration. Dr. Dunn will talk a little bit about the importance of being tied to a counselor, but as we begin to work with the chamber on our work readiness initiative throughout the county, internships, career exploration, encouraging our students to attend and go visit and or be tied to the Great Oaks, really it's appropriately begins at 6th grade to lay those foundations. And then again, we really want to talk about that STEM designation. Mrs. Getz and her team have worked really hard and have applied and received the feedback for the STEM designation. But as we continue to look at the importance of exploratory courses, we'd like for our students to have those multiple opportunities to do a few things. Accelerate, as a few years ago we did change our class ranking policy. It would be nice for our students to continue to be able to explore classes as early as 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. They make some more choices at high school, and they get to do that before they pay at college. And that really has been the foundation and the importance of our secondary program. So having the 6th graders be part of that program and be exposed to different, more fascinating electives and exploratory courses really will enhance the choices they make as they prepare to leave us, either college, career, or military.
Hello. I'm last for our group, and I don't think it was a height thing, but it may have been an experience thing. 23 years in a district, my first day ever teaching and everything was in this district. So I've been here for 14 campaigns. I taught elementary for 9 years. I was an elementary principal for 7 years. I was a junior high administrator for 5 years. So I have age on my side and experience with a lot of our families in the community regarding what we really want for the development of our kids, the social emotional development, and what we think helps us grow our children and give them the best environments possible. And we all know that's rooted in relationships. We know it's rooted in connections, which is why neighborhood schools were so important to this community. So when you think about the benefit of a 6-8 school, it really comes down to that opportunity that we are not providing at probably one of the most significant developmental moments in our lives. We are putting our kids together for 2 years at a time when their bodies and their minds are changing, maybe at the most at any time in their lives. And it doesn't give you much time. And I know some of you have heard me say this, but as a junior high principal, I was always transitioning. I was either transitioning 6th graders into junior high, or I was transitioning 8th graders to the high school. And we know how important it is, this community, because we team. We team in 7th grade. We team in 8th grade. We created a 9th grade community because we know how important that connection and those relationships are. And if we can get to a 6-8 building, we have a chance to grow that even more. For example, he shared a little bit, the counselors. When you go into 7th grade or 6th grade, if this happens, your assistant principal and your counselor and your principal, they get 3 years of working with you, of getting to know you, of understanding you and your family, which gives them a greater opportunity to meet your needs and to understand what those needs are. That's true for, like I said, the counselors, the assistant principal, the principal, and a key chunk of those elective teachers. They'll have a chance to see kids multiple times because electives can fall in a few different arenas. So I think I would say nothing is more important than relationships and connections, and anything that we can do to expand that opportunity for our kids at that developmental state is imperative for us to consider. And Jenny wanted me to clarify it, that the preschool's on State Route 28, that 32 is not correct. Do you have any questions for me? Mine was a little less question related.
I don't think Jenny really said that.
Oh, she did. We turned to each other and started laughing.
I don't think you wanted them to correct it. Okay.
Oh, you know what? I thought my watch when she texted said, I may have misread that. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Before we go to the next slide, I wanted to say to the board and to the community that as I have been speaking with folks via Thought Exchange, Facebook Live, with our voluntary staff meetings, just anybody in general that I can have an opportunity to speak with, what I think is important for folks to know, we'll go to the next slide, is I've been very transparent about the fact that the first time we can put a bond issue on is November of '21. And that 1 to 2 years after that, pass or fail, we're coming back for a levy. And this speaks to House Bill 1, the state funding proposal that is in some hearings now. There is a claim, these are my words, there is a claim that this fixes school funding. It does not fix school funding for Milford. As we had said earlier, we are considered a wealthy school district. And we all know that we are not. This new House bill does not make Milford whole in any way. The projections over a 6-year period would only give us an extra $200,000 over 6 years. So there's no way that fixes school funding. There's no way that that fixes the idea, my words, of taxpayer burden placed on homeowners and property owners. It does not fix that. And so I have made that clear that I wanted our local Representative Gene Schmidt, excuse me, and Senator Dr. Terry Johnson that it does not fix school funding if this passes, and that I don't want them to ever say, or others out there to say, oh, well, they fixed it in 2021. They did not fix it. So that's my soapbox on that piece. I think it's very important, as Paul Fallon mentioned earlier, I disagree. The district has done an excellent job fiscally. As you can see, the last operating levy for this district was in May of 2013. That's incredible that we've been able to get it this far when that's a levy that was only supposed to last 3 years, possibly 4 years if you were to stretch it out. We may make it 10 years. And I think that's incredible, and I think that's that says a lot about past administrators, past board members, current board members, the treasurer and his team, et cetera, and our team as well for being fiscally responsible with taxpayer dollars. So I just wanted to make sure that we knew that before we move forward. I think the other thing that is very important that I've made sure that I've told folks through all of those venues is that we are currently projected to have deficit spending, which means we're bringing less money in than what we're spending. We're spending more. I think it's important to know that our spending over the last 3 years has been 3.97% increase over those 3 years. Inflation is almost 2%. So we've been very conservative with our spending. We've asked the central office team to cut budgets here for this year, as well as going into next year, and to really make sure that what we're spending our dollars on are things that we are really using. So we have been fiscally responsible, and we will continue to be fiscally responsible with the taxpayer dollars. Have I generated any questions on this one? Okay, Roy, it's time. I think that's how I feel about this. It's time for us to place this bond issue on. That's my recommendation to the board. I think it's important for folks to know that the reason it's time is that we have elementary schools that have been upgraded. It's time for our students, it's time for our staff at the junior high school to have those same types of facilities. And the reason, being is that obviously that building is 59 years old. We've been at the capacity since we started there. Our enrollment is at 1,000 consistently. It is time for us to prepare our students to have modern learning experiences in a world economy. How can our students possibly compete in a world economy if we don't have those learning spaces for them? Spaces that are flexible, that meet the needs of all students. This new 6-8 middle school, as we have mentioned a few times now, can help us address this overcrowding that's in our elementary buildings. It's real. The last thing any of us want to do is to redistrict. That's the worst thing that we could possibly do to this community. It's not a threat. It's real. It's very real. This is also an opportunity for us to participate in the Ohio Facilities Construction Commission to get $11 million in matching funds. And those funds do go away in 13 months. So it's time to make this happen now. After the bond issue campaign in 2019 failed, the superintendent, the Board of Ed, and the administration, they did seek input. We did listen to the community. We've checked all those boxes. We were told to get the funding from OFCC. We got it. We're only going to do a 6-8 building, and we're going to do the site circulation and the safety. That's it. No athletics, no auditorium. That's not to say that we don't believe that we need those things. We believe we do, but we need to find ways to make those things happen, possibly through private donation or other. But we've checked all those boxes, and we will continue to solicit that type of feedback from our community going forward. Again, we have been great stewards of the taxpayer dollars. Brian Rabe, treasurer, and his team, again, have received this prestigious award from the state auditor. We're transparent. Ohio Checkbook is out there. You can check that. Anyone can see where the funds are going. So I commend Mr. Rabe and his team, again, as well as our team as well. And again, we've managed the taxpayer dollars well. 2013 was the last time we were on for a levy. So I think it's time. So I know that there might be some questions, but before I go to questions, I want to thank Brian and his team for helping with this presentation. My team here as well. Wendy's in the back. Everybody has been a part of this. We're very passionate about our beliefs that it is time for a 6-8 building in Milford. Emily.
How many other local districts have gotten the state auditor award like that? Like Southwest Ohio or?
There's been a number in Southwest, but I believe we're the only one. There's other ones within Southwest, but I believe we're the only ones in Claremont County.
Okay.
Other questions?
Yes, why, earlier you said 12 million for the state funding and now 11 million, and then I've heard 10 million, so what's the number and why?
Well, Jeff and I have looked at, we're waiting for that final notice of conditional, and we do believe it's going to be 12 million, roughly. That's a guesstimate. So it could be a little bit less.
So we don't know for sure yet.
We do not until we get that notice of conditional approval, which hopefully will be tomorrow or Monday.
That comes that OFCC sends to us that we approve. So it has fluctuated over the last couple of weeks a little bit.
It has.
And
You do have a draft. I did put a draft on your, yes, that's a draft of the, yes.
But we will have a hard number next week?
Hopefully tomorrow or Monday, yes. We need to get that notice of conditional approval, and then again, we will ask the board to approve that at the May board meeting.
I want to thank the team for putting together this information. I think this is a good start for our discussion related to what we all believe, in my view, is that this building creates limitations for our staff and our learners. We don't have to make a decision as a board this evening. This is really sort of the beginning of this discussion on what this can look like. But I like the early results that show that we are listening to what the information, that the feedback we've gotten in the past. We've been creative in ways to find a way to get there. We've eliminated anything other than what's necessary for this group's, and so we'll probably see, as per the schedule, over the next several months, there are certain things we will have to do as a voting board. That doesn't necessarily mean that we are approving the movement towards that, but we have to get those in place as per required by the state regarding a ballot issue. But I like this as a first step, and again, I know this is a lot of time. This is a tough time of the year as you're planning the final phases of our school year, as well as getting things ready for next year. We've all had I know you've had a tough year anyway, and this is such a great start, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, these are all issues we've been dealing with for the last 2 or 3 years, but I commend you for putting together a nice presentation. And these are things that those negative people that Mr. Fallon was talking about ought to be seeing and hearing.
This presentation will be available on our website, so we'll push it out to folks so that they can see it. So yes, you're correct. Everyone needs to see this. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I think the word he used was staunch. It was the key word tonight was staunch.
Opposers.
Staunch supporters, staunch opposers. Staunch.
Yeah, having sat on the CAD team, both Emily and I served on that team back in the summer of 19. We spent a lot of time in this very room. I concur with you. We have checked the boxes that just came up time and time again. This is what we need. This is what the community will support. We've done that. We may need to just freshen up and just make sure that the community is still there on those points, but, I mean, it's a great start. It really is.
Thank you. One final comment, if I may, my soapbox on school funding is, if you're a community member listening to this presentation today, the board meeting, contact your people. Let them know. Contact your senators and representatives and let them know how you feel about school funding. Let them know that the burden should not be on homeowners alone, property owners, et cetera, and they need to fix school funding once and for all.
And that's Jean Schmidt and Terry Johnson.
Yes.
They can find their names online.
Thank you, Emily.
Yes, I concur as well, because I hear loud and clear, as a homeowner, there's a big tax burden on all of us. And so, a lot of people come at us, I want more money for, all the services that are important in the community. But it's a funding Columbus decision that really needs to be rectified.
All right, we'll move on to item number 2 under superintendent business, asking for second reading, which is approval of the following listed policies that have gone through the policy committee and presented to the board last month.
This is the second reading. So we will take a roll call on this.
Yes.
We need a motion for the recommendation by the superintendent to adopt the regulations and exhibits as presented.
So moved.
Second.
Motion is second. Discussion? Questions or comments? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Under item 3, this is a second reading for policies to rescind. These are related to the FFCRA, the COVID Relief Act, that no longer is in play. They all expired December 31.
We need a motion to rescind the policies as presented.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Comments or questions? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Back to our superintendent, John Spicer, for our human resources business.
Thank you, President Ham, members of the board. Under item number 1, certified approvals. Under A, approval of the following certified resignations 1 through 3. Item B, approval of the following certified hiring recommendations 1 and 2. Under C, approval to give the following certified employees a $100 voucher from Xavier University to be used for tuition as a stipend for mentoring a student teacher. And D, approval of unpaid leave of absence for the following employees 1 through 4.
Need a motion for certified approvals as listed, items A through D.
So move.
Second.
Motion is second. Questions or commentary? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Under item 2, classified approvals. Under item A, approval of the following classified resignations numbers 1 and 2. Would like to congratulate Jerry Craig Brown, high school custodian, for the purposes of retirement, so congratulations there. Item B, approval to pay $75 monthly stipend for personal cell phone use for the following maintenance employee. Item C, approval of classified hiring recommendations for the 2021 school year 1 through 3. And D, approval of classified hiring recommendations for the 21-22 school year, number 1.
Under classified approvals, we need a motion for the approval of items A through D.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Questions? Commentary? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Item 3, athletic extracurricular supplemental approvals. Under item A, approval of the following building supplemental contract recommendations for the 2021 school year for junior high detention monitors as needed, 1 through 13. Item B, approval of the non-renewal of pupil activity supervisor contracts 1 through 27. Item C, correction on the 2021 contract for high school boys lacrosse coaches, 1 and 2. D, approval of the following district supplemental contract recommendations for the 21-22 school year, number 1. Item E, approval of the following building supplemental contract recommendations for the 21-22 school year, 1 through 34. Item F, approval of athletic supplemental contract recommendations for the 21-22 school year, 1 through 8. G, approval of athletic pupil activity supervisor contract recommendations for the 21-22 school year, numbers 1 through 19. Item H, approval of supplemental summer school positions for the 2021 school year, 1 through 6. Lastly, item I, approval of the end-of-course test proctors for Milford High School to be paid at $25 per hour on an as-needed basis, numbers 1 and 2.
We need a motion for athletic extracurricular supplemental approvals, item A through I.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion. Questions or comments? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Under item 4, I'm asking for the Board of Education to approve the memorandum of understanding with the Milford Education Association officer stipends. This is a flow-through money from MEA through Brian to back to them. We do this every year.
Motion to approve the MOU as presented.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Comments, questions? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
Under item 5, asking for your approval of the memorandum of understanding with the Milford Education Association regarding super severance.
We need a motion to approve the MOU as presented.
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Comments? Questions? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Moving on to curriculum and instruction, Superintendent John Spicer.
Thank you, President Ham, members of the board. Under item number 1, we are asking for approval for curriculum pay not to exceed 45 hours to coordinate and proctor mandatory state summer testing. And number 2, approval for curriculum pay not to exceed 25 hours to serve as liaisons and support the Milford High School Building Leadership Team, A through C. And 3, approval for curriculum pay not to exceed 35 hours to attend summer professional development with the Ohio Department of Education to facilitate a new data science pilot at Milford High School.
We need a motion to approve curriculum pay for items 1 through 3 as presented.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Discussion, comments? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you.
And under number 2, we are asking the Board of Education to approve the fee schedules as presented, the Milford High School fees, Milford Junior High School fees, elementary school fees, and the MD elementary fee schedule.
We need a motion to approve the fee schedules as presented.
So moved.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Questions? Comments?
John, could you just talk a little bit about the philosophy and, how we set these fees?
I can and will, but I'm going to turn it over to Paul because he has this affinity and he loves to discuss this. But our philosophy is definitely to keep fees as low as possible, and we try to reduce when we can. But I'm going to let Paul go at it because I know he likes to do this.
He looked ready, too, so.
He was ready.
I had it out, just in case. So the philosophy has been, since I've been here and since John was in this position, that one, any fee that we charge is for something a student owns, such as a consumable for Carnegie book. You bring home your writing work, your writing manual, wrong word, in elementary, and handbook. Anything that you're using one time. So that's something that's consumable, that is a book. It's also a license. A license usually has a one fee. And the philosophy has been keep them low, eliminate them when possible, but to distinguish and just their small user fees for being able to take or utilize those courses. You will see on there a large amount of advanced placement fees, especially for high school. Those are pass-through. We have, for purposes of equity, the College Board does waive those fees for students on free and reduced lunch. And then those fees are primarily just for the test, $95. So a couple courses do require a book, but again, it is a consumable. We have vetted it, but that's really been our philosophy, and that's K-12. Do what we can for as little as we can out of the general fund, and then fees added at a very appropriate level. We try to keep them low or eliminate them each year. We have continued, I think the junior high is a great example. Over the last 4 or 5 years, we've continued to lower and eliminate most of the fees at the junior high. But it's for things that students will own or only have a one-time use of.
Like recorders, thank you.
And we're happy to report that 2 grade levels will have recorders next year, thanks to COVID. 2 grade levels. Hopefully nobody in this room has people in both grade levels.
And having sat in the curriculum meeting last week, or I guess maybe it was this Monday, we went through this in great detail, and really there are an awful lot of change of $1, change of 0, except where you've got pass-throughs that you just can't do anything about. I think you're doing an excellent job of keeping the costs down for the parents of the people that have to go through it.
I will say that that goes back to our principals, our building level leaders in elementary, our department chairs at junior high and high school. They understand the district's philosophy. They understand to be good financial stewards. They work really hard. There are more reductions than there are additions, with the exception of AP. AP raises their fee. It's about $1 each year. That's their fee for their test. And so, yes, thank you for that.
And to speak to the engagement of your junior high and high school principals, they both sat in that meeting as well.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
it's good to see that type of engagement from the administration.
Yeah, and
on items like this.
John mentioned we have been asked to cut our budgets. We're also asking our building principals to make the same sacrifices that we're making. So they are definitely part of the financial picture, K-12.
Thank you, Paul.
So we have a motion and a second. We'll need to do roll call.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so moving on, we have our second public participation of the evening. Do we have anyone that would like to speak? Hearing no one, our next regular board meeting will be May 13th of 2021.
You might want to point out that that is a change from the original calendar at the beginning of the year, just so there's no confusion.
I think that's is it a week before?
1 week early.
1 week
One week
earlier.
early, so
One
it's
week
still on
early.
Thursday, but it'll be the second Thursday of the month rather than the third Thursday. That will be right here at the administrative offices at 1099 State Route 131, Milford, Ohio, 45150. Third item, as we finish out, is our discussion. Any item, anything anyone would like to bring up? I have one. So we had planned on entering executive session tonight, but the agenda and the reasoning for going into it is not why we're meeting for executive session. So the board, we want to enter an executive session to discuss the, well, I don't know, what wording would you use? To discuss an employee, right? But not the employment of an employee. Is there a difference?
No.
Their
The
job.
descriptions of that resolution, this is the only one that fit with what you want to talk about.
Okay, so
It talked
this-
about,
So we just freaked out about this for nothing?
yeah, because it
Okay.
talks about the discipline, promotion, and so, there's a couple of them, none of them fit. This employment was the only one that fit with what you want to discuss.
Because it makes it sound like we're hiring somebody.
It does, but you're talking about any type, the employment would be, not necessarily that you're hiring them, but any part of their job.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, I had to read it a couple times and pick out, okay, this doesn't apply, this doesn't apply, so,
Well,
yeah,
and with board docs being new, you don't know if sometimes there's a glitch or something, and,
right.
yeah, okay.
Anything else?
I do believe this is the longest meeting I've been at in 2 years.
Well, we're not done yet. I got 2 items if no one else does.
This is still short yet, Dave.
Well, no, I'm just excited that Mr. Dickey decided this was what he wanted to really do on a Thursday night.
Yeah.
And hang out to the very end.
He's made it this far.
Okay, thank you. I am very excited to announce that student vaccines are coming. Pfizer vaccine for our 16 to 18-year-olds. I cannot release the dates yet. They're not exactly set in stone. They're set in wet cement, as I was told today. So that's within the next couple weeks, though. So it's coming. We'll have 2 days of possible vaccinations here for our students, but also their families. It will also be an open clinic for anyone in the Milford area. So we're going to open that up to anyone that wants to come. They will have to sign up through Armor Vax, which is an app. I think you can also do it online. I've done it via the app for my family members. So I'm excited about that.
And this will continue to be Pfizer?
Yes, this will be a
That's the only one
Pfizer
for
vaccine.
16-year-olds.
Oh, that's right, okay.
It's the only one that's approved for 16 to 18-year-olds. So we're really excited about that opportunity. Also, once the CDC gives us, gives, not us, but everyone the guidance that it can be used for 12 to 18-year-olds, we'll do the same thing for those families as well that want to have their students vaccinated as well. So we're really excited about that opportunity. So that's to come hopefully tomorrow afternoon, our messaging, video message for tomorrow, hopefully that will include this as well. We'll have the dates, is my hope.
Well, it's good for, especially for some of our seniors who have chosen the path of moving on to university, because there are several universities I've seen reported that are going to require that they have proof of a vaccine in order to enter campus in the fall.
Yes.
So it would be a good start for them.
Yes, 18-year-olds can come by themselves, but the CDC is requiring 16 and 17-year-olds to bring a parent or guardian with them. So those vaccine clinics will likely be somewhere in the range of starting around 1 or 1:30 to capture our 18-year-olds before they leave campus, and then going into the evening for a little bit on both days. So great news there. The second thing that I'd like to just talk to the board about a little bit is something that we have done multiple times with our staff at the voluntary meetings, also with our principals. We have talked for months as a building, or excuse me, as a central office team about Eagle Online. We brought up at the Thought Exchange, the last Thought Exchange, Facebook Live event. We talked about Eagle Online and where we're headed for next year. And I think as recent as 2 weeks ago, we've had other school districts in Southwest Ohio decide that we're not going to do online learning for next year. We're going to bring our students back. We're going to be in person. Our staff has had the opportunity to be vaccinated. Our 16 to 18-year-olds will be vaccinated, hopefully 12 to 18. There are numerous reasons. This platform was created to handle a pandemic. I think that our team here at Central Office, along with our teachers, we'd like to gather some input from them, our principals as well, and develop a program that is robust in a different way than trying to accommodate a pandemic. Our core from the beginning has been our platinum level of service has always been in-person learning. That's what we do best. Our students one-on-one in a classroom, that's our best level of service. Our Eagle Online teachers, our hybrid teachers at the junior high and the high school, and the online teachers as well, 7 through 12, have been nothing short of amazing. Their work has been great, but I think we all know that, again, our best level of service, what we do best is having students in classrooms. And so we're going to do that. That's our plan at this point. Something that is not as important as student mental health and all the other reasons that we've talked about is it's also economically, we cannot sustain it. We just can't. It's in the millions of dollars to sustain this. We've been able to use COVID Relief Act money this past year to pay for this, to make it work for us, to not take from the general fund. We're talking upwards of 40 teachers that we would need to hire alone just to do that and to keep our level of service that we have now. So that's the news. I mean, I think most folks have known it, especially if you're in a building, you know it. If you're a parent that has been on the Facebook Live events and you've watched the recordings, you know that we've been talking about it, and the likelihood is that this is where we were headed. And I think this is the announcement that that's where we are going. And so I think we're excited to have all of our students back next year. We have the extended learning plan that we did release that will meet the needs of our current in-person students, but those students that are coming back to in-person to meet their social emotional needs, their academic needs, et cetera.
Certainly support that. There's no substitute for in-person and personal relationships in the classroom.
And are I know a lot of the staff who chose to be the online teachers were hesitant because of the risk. And are they feeling more comfortable, especially now that adults can be vaccinated? So
Yes, I think folks are ready to come back to in-person learning. Of course, there are always folks that would enjoy the opportunity to continue during online learning. If that's something we can do in the future for them, we will. We'll put the best folks, as Paul always says, we'll get the right people on the bus in the right seat, and that's what we'll do. So we feel very confident in our placement. We made a commitment to elementary Eagle Online teachers to get them back to their building with our best level of integrity. You also passed an MOU stating that that's what we would do, and we have done that. There are a couple teachers that did not make it back to their building, but there are also a couple teachers that were moved buildings this year but wanted to stay, and they're going to be able to stay. So we've been able to accommodate them as well. So we have done our level best to accommodate those folks. And I commend, again, the central office team and all of our principals to try to get those folks back to where they want to be.
As sort of related, as a parent, it's starting to feel normal again. Like, this is what school is. We're returning back to what, the connections and the activities are allowed back in some buildings. And so it just is like, it feels, and vaccine levels are going up, it sort of is like, I'm feeling one brick off my shoulders, you know, it's getting a little lighter, so.
Good. We're going to do our level best to bring things back safely, responsibly, common sense. So we're going to do our best to try to bring some sense of normalcy back to our community.
Okay. Anything else? We are going to need a motion for the board to enter executive session for the discussion related to an employment of an employee.
So move.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Mrs. Brady?
Yes.
Mrs. Chestnut?
Yes.
Mr. Miranda?
Yes.
Mr. Yaki?
Yes.
Mr. Ham?
Yes, thank you. We are going to enter executive session. There will be no action taken coming out of executive session tonight. Thank you guys for coming.